Hello and welcome to this focus on thought leadership in South Africa's retirement ecosystem. And my name is Fifi Peters. You would know by now that the country's retirement system is undergoing transformation. We've had the new two-part retirement system, the fund consolidation and compulsory preservation being billed as potential game changers that could boost retirement outcomes here in the country by about 2 to 3-fold over the next few decades. But with South Africa's savings rate still stuck at around 15% of GDP, which is well below the 25% mark seen in fast-growing economies, the big question is whether these reforms will actually deliver for ordinary South Africans. And here to answer is my guest today, Michelle Acton, the Chief Customer Officer over at Old Mutual Corporate. So Michelle, thanks so much for your time. You guys recently held a conference and retirement was the conversation on the table. So perhaps let's just start with the beginning assessment of how we're doing as a country right now.
So I think we're on the right track, but there's still a lot more work to be done. As you mentioned, the two-part reforms and a number of other things that have happened over the last decade have done great work in terms of improving the quality of our governance and the framework, but there's still a lot more we need to do. And that's really where we focused our thought leadership event around what are the next steps? How do we take the momentum we've had up until now and keep it moving forward that we can ultimately increase retirement outcomes for South Africans? Because that's what we want to be doing.
No, ultimately, I mean, I remember having a conversation actually just this week with a friend to say that we cannot be our parents who are in a position whereby they can't afford to retire because they haven't set aside enough funds. The two-part retirement system, one of the tools hoping to change that outcome. And right now we've been focusing quite a lot on the people that have actually been withdrawing from the part that they're allowed to. But just talk to us in your assessment as you see, as how you see this picture changing our retirement outcomes longer term.
So I think you're right. With the two-part over the last 12 months, can you believe it? It's almost been a year since it's been implemented. But the focus was very much, I can now access some of my retirement fund. Where the focus wasn't, and where we believe the greatest impact is going to be made, is on the component where some of your money is now going to be preserved till retirement. Because as you know, a lot of the problems we've had historically is people were part of retirement funds saving, but they changed jobs and cash everything out. So that's now been put a stop to. So all future contributions from last year that have gone in, you now can't access. Sure. And that's going to have a phenomenal impact, we believe, on retirement outcomes. But it's not something that if we change today, we're going to see the impact tomorrow, because this is long-term investment. So we're talking about the future retirement outcomes for the younger generation is going to have a big impact. So I think that has definitely had a huge impact. In fact, we've seen already, just looking at the stats over the last 12 months, where historically most people just defaulted to taking cash because some of it has to be preserved. We're finding a lot more people are preserving all of it or a lot more of it just because now they're beginning to realize that was an option or that's what they should be doing.
No, fantastic. And you talk about a lot of people or some people who actually change jobs, tapping into their retirement fund or so to make do, but some as a result of jobs being lost. And we do know that we're in a tricky place as a global ecosystem, as it were, with the technological changes that are happening, innovations that are around AI that are making many of us question whether we'll still have a job. But I guess where I'm going to say is that retirement, a two-part introduction, 12 months underway, you say that it definitely will help improve outcomes in the longer term. But I imagine it's a whole host of tools that we need to be employing in the toolkit right now. And so maybe let's just talk about the other things that we could be doing that could, in the main, improve the retirement picture.
I think one of the big things that we think is next step is we've seen at the moment the way our system operates is if your employer wants to provide retirement funding, they can. It's not compulsory to do so. And we've also seen that for self-employed individuals, it's up to you to decide if you want to save. So I think one of the big levers we believe needs to start coming in is what we call auto-enrollment. Sure. So the idea that all employers should be providing retirement funding for their staff. I think that is an important step. We can't have only probably just around 50% of formerly employed South Africans are on a fund. I mean, that number's too low.
Yeah.
we need to be bringing it up, especially in a country like South Africa, where if you don't provide for yourself or save towards your retirement fund, the only thing you've got is your old age state grant, which is very, very low for a working South African. So I think the one of the big steps is we need to be getting to the stage where how do we make it compulsory that vehicles, it's easier for people to save. And that's really where the auto-enrollment piece comes in. And I think the second element that's really important is around minimum contributions. Okay. So we have a lot of people who are going, I'm part of my employer's fund, I'm saving, so therefore I'm okay. Yeah. When actually, when you go look at the number, they're only contributing 5% or something. So you'll have people who've done 30 years of service, they'll get to retirement, and they're going, but I've worked my whole career for this employer, and how do I not have enough money? And part of it is they didn't realize they weren't contributing enough. Sure. So I think if we can look at as an industry, how do we bring in auto-enrollment? So how do we get more employers providing vehicles for their staff to save? How do we create some level of minimum contribution? Not overnight. I think what's important, like you mentioned, South Africa is an economy, there's a cost of living crisis, it's really tough, but we need to, over time, with a sort of a roadmap of 10 years, for example, start bringing it in, that over time, if it's 1%, 2%, 3% a year, that by the end of 10 years, we have a situation that we're all in a much better place, because we want to get into a place where actually the average South African's reaching retirement and has some level of security in their retirement years.
Yeah, so two things then. Who drives the crafting of that framework that you're talking about? Are you talking about policy, taking a front seat, as it were, in making it mandatory for employers to do so? And also, with regard to the minimum contribution, like what's a good rate minimally to contribute? And again, who puts that in stone?
So I think it's a partnership. If there's one thing we've seen with the two-part, one of the things that brought the success was the collaboration between unions, between employers, between various industry stakeholders, policymakers and regulators came together to get what we've got now in terms of the two-part. And I think it is definitely a co-created solution in terms of how we bring it in specifically for South Africa with the unique circumstances. So a lot of it is going to be policy and the policymakers and the regulators, but I don't think it's something that needs to be is done in isolation. We need to make sure that we develop something that works for South Africa, for South Africans. And so I think it's a collaborative approach in terms of pulling that together. It's about having the right focus to make sure all the parties are having the right conversations, taking it forward.
Sure, and as you say, something that is done over time. So you also mentioned the fact that there are individuals who are self-employed, as it were. And we do know that the world of work is changing, again, because of how technology has reconfigured the game. And there's this rise of the gig economy and digital workers and all of that who are earning income in their own ways. Some who are not of the knowledge that they should be contributing and who don't have sort of systems in place to ensure that the contributions towards their future is mandatory. How are players like Old Mutual and the retirement industry at large thinking about catering for these individuals and making sure that they're also okay come tomorrow when they no longer are in the position to work because of age or circumstance?
Yeah, so I don't think there's like a one thing that's exactly it. There's a number of factors that need to be pulled together. So I think one key element is financial literacy, and what specifically retirement literacy. So we need to be educating and creating the awareness and upskilling South Africans around it. And that's not an overnight thing. That is something that over time we need to build. The other is enabling access to products that people can use and creating that awareness. And I mean, I come back to it, but I think the one thing that was really cool about two-part was it was the coolest topic last year. I mean, who would have thought retirement funds would have been sexy, but last year they were. And it's really about building on that. So I think it's important that we need to be working together to create that awareness and make it easier. And some of that is done by policy, some of it is by various industry players. But we've seen, and you mentioned in your opening, Ryan, the fact that currently we're sitting only at about a 15% savings rate. We need to get that up to 25%. So it's a cultural thing as well. We need to bring in this culture of savings. Sure. And a lot of it needs to be legislated. There needs to be guardrails in place that enforces people to put some savings away. And what we've seen around the world is it's not an income thing, because that's the other thing that often comes. When I earn more, when I save, when I pay less tax, when I do this, then I will start saving. But actually, you've got people we've seen even at lower income levels, people saving sufficiently because they've got that financial discipline. We've seen people at very high income levels not saving at all.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it is around creating the right guardrails, the right practices, the right education element, and really just driving that culture of savings.
Yeah, no, you're right, because right now from here we read about the Chinese and how it is a cultural thing to save in Chinese culture, and clearly it's something that can be created with the right building blocks, as it were. But I want to touch on another point. So you mentioned financial literacy and you mentioned the right products, because these workers in this industry, I mean, they don't have a sort of a monthly income. Sometimes you've got incomes that come at ad hoc moments, and I'm just wondering if the industry is responding by way of products to suit an income that is not consistent on a monthly basis vis-a-vis someone who is in full-time employment.
So I think there's a balance, right? So the one is looking at, and we talk about the social security of the country as a whole, and I think absolutely we need to look at how do we make savings easier and more accessible. The other element is Australia is a great example. So in Australia over the last 35 years, they've slowly brought in compulsory savings. They slowly started with if you earned above a certain amount, if you were older than a certain age, you'd have to consume. And over time, they've actually built a system that if you are a waitress at the local restaurant, then 12% of your income you earn is deducted by who's paying you and paid over into the retirement system now. Sure. Even if you're 16 years old. So I think there's a lot that can be done, and we've got to work out where's the right place to start. And then over time, sort of bringing it through to all different layers of society. So, I mean, for example, if we start with the formal working and say, actually, from formal employed, if someone's paying you, then they must be able to take some and pay it over to some savings vehicle, because often that's the trigger. And then over time, we expand it's included in that net.
I know there's questions around when we should actually make the retirement age, because 65 is kind of like the new 50 now. People are looking good. People are living longer, and it does talk about how we change the ecosystem as well to accommodate for that. But we are out of time, and thanks so much for joining us in studio. Very, very important discussion, as I said, around investing in your future self to ensure that, I mean, when you no longer need to work, it's about island living and pina coladas as opposed to standing in a social grant line, which is currently the present case for many South Africans right now, which the retirement industry is trying to change, but all in good time. I was in conversation with Michelle Acton, Chief Customer Officer at Old Mutual, for the insights into the power employers have to influence change here in South Africa's retirement landscape, and also how employers, industry and policymakers can collaborate better to unlock better and higher retirement outcomes for their workers. Thanks for watching, and we'll do it again real soon. Goodbye.